Welcome to News for Scotland. Here are this week's Scottish news headlines. First Minister John Swinney has this week unveiled his plans for achieving independence with the launch of a new 91-page document titled A Fresh Start with Independence, just days ahead of the SNP conference in Aberdeen, which starts tomorrow, Saturday. In it, he suggests that Scots families would be £10,000 a year better off if Scotland was independent. The paper's launch follows the signing of what was described as a landmark agreement with the campaign group Believe in Scotland in Blairgowrie at the weekend to work in partnership to promote independence to the people of Scotland. Swinney said that the opportunity of independence is the opportunity of higher living standards. The independent think tank, the Resolution Foundation, said UK households would see an £8,300 a year uplift if the average income and inequality were the same as other similar-sized countries. If the same analysis were applied to an independent Scotland, Scottish households would be £10,200 better off, which shows how much better those comparable nation-states do than the UK. Swinney also said that it was now urgent and essential that Scotland becomes independent as a result of the rightward shift in the UK. Given the direction Westminster is intent on taking Scotland day by day, the need for people in Scotland to consider an alternative future is becoming more and more pressing, the First Minister said. Indeed, I believe it is urgent and essential, he added. The prospect of Farage becoming Prime Minister is a very real one, but even if Farage does not make it to number 10, he is driving the agenda of Westminster ever more to the right. I believe with all my head and all my heart that cannot be the best future for Scotland. However, critics have been quick to point out that the document offers little new information. ALBA leader and former SNP Justice Minister Kenny MacAskill said telling us yet again what we know all too well is taking us nowhere. And Robin McAlpine of the pro-independence think tank dismissed the document, saying it was almost a cut and paste from existing documents. But others argue that the document is not for those who already support independence. Its purpose is to reopen the debate on independence and to convince the Scottish electorate of the case for it. Meanwhile, Salvo director Sarah Salyers criticised the paper for failing to set out whether Scots would get a say on the SNP's desire to join the European Union and NATO. Where are the proposals for mechanisms to guarantee practical sovereignty as a way of ensuring Scotland will not suffer the same fate of a UK subject to an internationally criminal, increasingly fascist government where there is no claim of right to invoke? A US spyware firm has ruled out helping the UK government implement digital ID, amid concerns the legislation is undemocratic. Palantir Technologies said it would not be participating in the rollout of digital IDs in the UK, warning the programme needs to be decided at the ballot box. An online petition reaching nearly 3 million signatures in just a couple of weeks is calling for the scheme to be scrapped. There was no mention of digital IDs in Labour's manifesto at last year's general election, and, despite a petition reaching nearly 3 million signatures, Starmer's government has said it is pressing ahead with it anyway, claiming it will help tackle illegal migration, make accessing government services easier, and enable wider efficiencies. But critics fear that it is just another step by the UK government towards creating an authoritarian surveillance state. Some are also warning of the risks posed to everyone's personal data being breached by hackers. Palantir was thought to be a possible bidder for the digital ID programme due to its existing contracts with the UK Ministry of Defence and its specialism in data management, as well as £1.5 billion worth of investments in the UK announced last month. But the firm's UK boss, Lewis Mosley, said Palantir would not bid for contracts and criticised the UK government's decision to implement the IDs for which there hasn't been a mandate from the public. Mosley said the firm would only help governments implement the policies they have been elected to deliver, saying that he had personal concerns over the potential abuses the digital ID scheme could face. Scottish independence blogger Leah Gunn Barrett said the UK government, in ignoring the size of the petition, are basically telling us to buzz off. They've decided to do it, and we serfs will just have to deal with it. They claim it won't be compulsory for now. But the phrase, "your boarding pass to government," contains a veiled threat. If you refuse to have a digital ID, you could be denied your state benefits or pension. It's not about controlling immigration, it's about controlling us, she said. The Home Office already operates an electronic visa for immigrants, the e-visa system, which records their identity and status. It's plagued with technical problems, and in one case reported to the Information Commissioner's Office. The errors with Home Office data were so bad that they breached UK data protection law, she said. The Tony Blair Institute has already received £350 million from Zionist tech billionaire Larry Ellison to force this surveillance tool onto the UK. Ellison has also donated $16.6 million to Friends of the Israeli Defence Forces. Digital IDs were nowhere to be seen in English Labour's election manifesto. But Starmer, the most unpopular Prime Minister in recorded history, has caved into pressure from his mentor and advisor, Sir Anthony Charles Linton Blair, who loves digital IDs and AI because of their potential to make him even richer, Gunn Barrett said. In the latest British Social Attitudes survey, just 12% of respondents said they trusted the government to put the national interest before party interest, the lowest figure ever recorded. So why on earth should we trust the government to act in our interests this time? Digital IDs are being introduced because they are the British state's ultimate tools to surveil and control an increasingly angry and restless population, she said. Plans to give police greater powers to restrict protests have been announced by Keir Starmer's supposedly Labour government. Starmer, who once gave a TV interview saying Israel had the right to starve the civilian population in Gaza as a means to defend itself despite Israel's actions being illegal under international law, has also introduced a crackdown on pro-Palestine anti-genocide protests by controversially proscribing the non-violent Palestine Action protest group as a terrorist organization. This followed the group's protest against the RAF being used to carry out spy flights on behalf of Israel to identify targets in Gaza for Israel to hit when they spray-painted a few warplanes with red paint at RAF Brize Norton in June. More than 40,000 children have so far been murdered by the Israeli state since the Israeli offensive began on Gaza's civilian population 2 years ago, because Hamas launched an attack on Israel on October 7, 2023. However, British politicians and the UK mainstream media never put the whole story in context, such as how Palestine was effectively wiped from the map in 1948, when Palestinians were violently forced off their land and out of their homes in order to create the State of Israel. However, by targeting civilians with the support of Western governments for the actions of a group of terrorists, Israel is committing war crimes. It would be like British politicians who today defend what's being done to the civilian population of Gaza as a form of collective punishment, ordering an operation to carpet bomb Dublin back in the 1980s for the actions of the IRA terrorist campaign in London. Unthinkable. However, the new extended police powers will only apply to England and Wales, not Scotland, although it remains to be seen if police in Scotland attempt to enforce the crackdown anyway, as they have for protesters wearing T-shirts opposing Israel's genocide and expressing support for Palestine Action. The Scottish Government has said it will consider Labour government plans to give the police greater powers to restrict protests. The plans have been branded ludicrous by rights organisations such as Amnesty International, which argued they are a rehash of measures previously ruled unlawful. The UK government has previously proposed amendments to Sections 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act 1986, spearheaded by Suella Braverman in 2023. But in May 2024, the High Court ruled that certain regulations issued under these amendments were not lawful. The measures follow frequent pro-Palestine demonstrations, including protests in Edinburgh and Glasgow. The Scottish Government said it has not yet seen the UK government's proposals, but would consider their relevance to Scotland. It remains to be seen if Israel honours the ceasefire deal announced yesterday, which has come about as a result of long overdue pressure by the US on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The deal, the terms of which the war-weary population of Gaza have been forced to accept, and which was hammered out with the involvement of everyone but the Palestinians themselves, vaguely envisions an eventual role for the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, something Netanyahu has long opposed. But it requires the authority, which administers parts of the West Bank, to undergo a sweeping reform program which could take years, whilst Israel, aside from not murdering a civilian population or continuing to build more illegal West Bank settlements, has no such obligations placed on it. The Trump plan is even more vague about a future Palestinian state, and Western states like the US and UK, who have provided military support for Israel throughout its latest genocidal campaign, will hope that the ceasefire will hold so that the Palestinian issue can be forgotten for another decade or more. Trump, like a petulant child, is telling the world he now deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. Energy bills have risen yet again, despite Keir Starmer making a central pledge at the general election to cut them for everyone, ALBA party leader Kenny MacAskill said. Scotland produces far more energy than we consume, yet instead of enjoying the lowest bills in Europe, our people are hammered with some of the highest. This, quite literally, is the cost of the Union. As the nights draw in and winter approaches, energy will once more be the #1 political issue, he said. And it is nothing short of obscene that in a nation as energy-rich as Scotland, so many of our people are condemned to fuel poverty. Many will suffer, and tragically some will die this winter because of Westminster's failed energy policy. That is one of the clearest and strongest cases we can ever make for independence, said MacAskill. The party announced that it is contesting the Buckhaven, Methil and Wemyss by-election in Fife on November 6th. Their candidate is Christine Watson. The party's annual conference will take place in Dundee on the 24th and 25th of October. MacAskill added, "We must continue to hammer home the simple, damning truth. Scotland is an energy-rich nation with fuel-poor people. That is a national disgrace, and it is the strongest possible argument for independence." The Scottish Greens have pledged to pick more fights with the UK government and push the limits of devolution. Scottish Greens co-leader Ross Greer said we need an independent strategy that is so much braver than what the Scottish government's putting forward at the moment. There is no shortcut to independence, he said. Greer said, "This is a monumental political challenge. To achieve that kind of goal, we need to be bold, we need to be ambitious, we need to be hopeful, and we need to be combative." The First Minister, John Swinney, put forward his plans for Scottish independence in July, saying, getting a second referendum could only be achieved if the SNP win a majority in Holyrood. But it has been met by much opposition from SNP members, who are set to challenge it at this weekend's party conference in Aberdeen, which starts tomorrow Saturday, with several competing amendments. "I think I'm probably in the same boat as most SNP members in my frustration at the First Minister's strategy," Greer said. "It's not a strategy to achieve independence, it's a strategy to re-elect the SNP. He has every right to campaign to re-elect his own party. That's his job as party leader. But he should not present that as a strategy to achieve Scotland's independence. We've been stuck as a movement for most of the last decade just endlessly talking about process, and that has not built support for the cause itself. The general public, the people in the middle who we actually need to persuade, don't care about process. They don't know what a Section 30 order is, and they are not interested in what the Supreme Court's judgment was." Greer went on, "What I'm arguing for is a strategy to build support for independence, and to do that by maximising the good that we can do with the powers that we've already got." The Scottish Greens co-leader said that his strategy involves going into the grey areas between what's devolved and reserved, and essentially dare the UK government to stop us. Greer accused the SNP of being far too timid. And every time the UK government decides, "No, you have gone too far and we're stepping in," they're just making the case for constitutional change for us. All of that collectively builds support for independence itself. We all need to acknowledge that we will not become an independent nation until that is clearly, undisputedly, the settled will of the majority of people who live here. Yes is now just ever so slightly in the lead if you look at the average of recent polls. But that's not the kind of decisive lead that we need for the kind of political pressure that we require, he said. Sunday marks the first anniversary of the passing of former SNP First Minister and ALBA party founder Alex Salmond. who was in North Macedonia at the time of his death. A giant in Scottish politics, Salmond got an unprecedented landslide victory in the 2011 Scottish parliamentary election, securing an outright single-party majority of 69 seats, something which the UK-designed system was meant to prevent. As a result, the UK government was forced to grant an independence referendum at his request, although many in the independence movement believe the result was manipulated by the British state largely through scare tactics, a compliant and largely hostile mainstream media, and even through potential vote rigging with postal ballots sent to be counted in England. Nevertheless, despite the result, the 2014 referendum changed Scottish politics and Scotland's relationship to the British state forever. Alex Salmond was always totally committed to Scotland's cause and independence, from when he won his first Westminster seat in 1987, representing Banff and Buchan, through to his untimely death. He held the Banff and Buchan Westminster seat 5 times, through until 2010, and also won the Gordon seat in the Scottish parliamentary elections in 1999, when the devolved Parliament, an executive branch of Westminster, rather than a restored sovereign parliament, was created, and again in 2007 when he became First Minister and changed the name of the then Scottish executive to the Scottish Government. There is no doubt he changed the course of Scotland's political landscape, taking support for Scottish independence from 24% in 2007 to 51% according to a YouGov poll conducted for the Sunday Times and published on September 7, 2014. Panicked, the British state, which went into overdrive to ensure that yes did not prevail, including spreading multiple lies, unchallenged by mainstream media, such as pensioners would not receive their pensions if they voted to leave the UK. The result, rigged ballots and lies notwithstanding, meant that yes lost but still achieved 45%, which became the new benchmark of support, never going below that number again. Recent polls, which are still weighted by the 2014 results to make the yes lead look smaller than it really is, are now sitting at 52%, although, if weighting was not used by pollsters, this figure would be higher. He then made what many regard as the biggest mistake of his political career, stepping down as First Minister after the referendum defeat with the words, "The dream will never die." A convention to discuss routes to independence is to be held in Glasgow on Saturday, November 8th. Organised by Independence Forum Scotland, the free event, for which bookings have been coming in fast, will feature a presentation on pensions in an independent Scotland by the Scottish Currency Group's Jim Osborne, and a presentation by Professor Aileen McHarg of Durham University, who will offer an objective academic analysis of the available routes to independence. Other speakers include Greg McCara of IFS, who will talk about Scotland's right to decide, Peter Bell, who will outline his thinking behind his manifesto for independence, and an update from Salvo Liberation Scotland on their United Nations bid to have Scotland decolonised from England, posing as the UK. A discussion will follow with panel members, including former MSP Alex Neil, independence activist Leah Gunn Barrett, and former Glasgow lawyer Ewan Kennedy. For details, visit the IFS website, independenceforum.scot. Economist and independence commentator Professor Richard Murphy has suggested that it is quite likely that support for Scottish independence could be made a terrorist offence if the UK government follows what Trump is doing in the US. Writing in the national newspaper, Murphy said, "Where the US goes, the UK has a horrible habit of following, leaving Scotland's freedom to choose at risk. Labour has already made writing on a piece of cardboard an offence punishable by up to 14 years in jail, showing how far they have already moved in the direction of Trump and his political extremism. With Reform set to win the next general election in England, while Scotland, aside from the Scottish borders, rejects Farage, it is quite reasonable to ask how long will it be before supporting independence becomes a terrorist offence? How will Scotland react to such a situation? That has to be the question for everyone in the country now," he said. Glasgow's Finnieston has been named one of the coolest places in the UK by the online events magazine Time Out. Finnieston was named alongside Ancoats in Manchester and London Road in Brighton. When looking into what makes a neighbourhood truly cool, Time Out said a genuinely exciting roster of restaurants, cafes and bars, a colourful nightlife and a fantastic art scene are among the things you need to look out for. Discussing Finnieston in Glasgow, Time Out said, "In 2025, you'll still find plenty of the warehouses and exposed brick interiors of Finnieston's industrial past. Only now they're features of trendy music venues like SWG3 or Michelin-rated restaurant Ox and Finch. New spots are always popping up down this end of Sochi Hall and Argyle streets. Then there's the continued brilliance of classic Finnieston spots like the Hidden Lane, which remains an ever-evolving community where local artists can create, collaborate, and sell their work. Finnieston has long been a popular area, with it also being named one of the coolest neighbourhoods by the Telegraph last year. One of the strangest places in Edinburgh, an American-style Wild West ghost town along an unassuming alleyway in Morningside, still attracts around 30 to 40 tourists a day. Originally built in 1995 as an elaborate gimmick for a furniture business which has long since ceased trading, it is now one of Edinburgh's strangest tourist attractions. The facades were the idea of Michael Faulkner, son of the last Prime Minister of Northern Ireland and a one-time real cowboy in North America before he injured his back in a riding accident. He moved to Edinburgh and established Pine Country, a furniture store in the lane off Spring Valley Gardens in Morningside, accessible by a passage through a tenement block. Faulkner expanded into a second store on the site, the Great American Indoors, selling Santa Fe-style furniture. Known locally as El Paso, it continues to impress despite being in a dilapidated state, with TripAdvisor users giving it a 3.3 out of 5 rating. The facades of a jail, a horse stables, a cantina and a saloon remain down the generally quiet alleyway, along with several other Western-themed businesses. Some of the doors are still in use to this day, with the door to the cantina actually the fire door for the Morningside Library. One person said, "I love this place. A really strange Edinburgh find, which is anachronistic and charming in a unique way. I recommend bringing water pistols for a Wild West duel." For those wishing to visit, the Wild West town is tucked away up an alleyway off Spring Valley Gardens in Morningside. The Scottish Greens have slammed the undemocratic terror charges which have been brought against one of their party campaign managers. Edinburgh Greens campaign coordinator Adam McGibbon was charged with 2 offences under the Terrorism Act on Friday last week, in connection with 2 pro-Palestine protests he attended weeks earlier. At both protests, McGibbon held a sign which read, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." The Scottish Greens are opposed to the proscription of Palestine Action, which was brought in by then Home Secretary Yvette Cooper in July following the Direct Action Group's targeting of 2 aircraft at RAF Bryce Norton. Protests have taken place regularly across Scotland since the ban came into effect, resulting in a swathe of activists being charged with terror offences. Scottish Greens MSP Maggie Chapman said the latest charge was a direct attack on free speech and on our democratic principles. "It is a worrying sign that the right to protest is being stripped away," she said. Chapman went on to say that this is not just about one arrest. It is about whether people feel safe to speak up against apartheid, against oppression, against injustice, without fear of severe legal reprisals, she said. She added, "Supporting humanitarian rights is not, and should never be, treated as terrorism." 3D models from the Scottish Maritime Museum have been used without their knowledge by Israel in propaganda videos picked up by mainstream media, including the BBC, Daily Mail, Fox News, and CNN. The Irvine, North Ayrshire-based museum's 3D scans were sourced from the video games industry and were used to depict fictional Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iranian sites, including fake tunnels, underground bunkers, or missile sites, which cannot easily be verified. The museum said that it has no control over how the scans are used, as some are available online through Creative Commons licensing. The IDF has produced more than 40 propaganda animations, which have been shared through Israel's official channels and picked up by mainstream media to justify Israel's attacks on civilian infrastructure such as apartment blocks and hospitals. MSP for Cunningham South, Ruth Maguire said, "It was not surprising that an army being deployed by their government in an illegal occupation and genocide of the Palestinian people is using propaganda containing false and misleading claims. What my constituents may be concerned and surprised by is that national broadcasters are picking it up and sharing it," she said. If you are an independence group wishing to publicise an upcoming event, please email details to info@scotland24.tv. Independence Forum Scotland is holding a convention on Saturday, November 8th, entitled Routes to Independence. The event will take place at Adelaide Place, 209 Bath Street, Glasgow. The event is free to attend, but book your place in advance. Visit independenceforum.scot/national-convention-application. Viewers of News for Scotland are being asked to encourage at least 2 people they know to watch the Scotland channel regularly in order to grow the reach of independent Scottish television media. It's not new that British mainstream media has deliberately misrepresented Scotland, including by omission. This has been happening since well before the 2014 independence referendum. It's now being ramped up again as the Union comes under increased pressure. Unlike channels such as GB News, the Scotland Channel does not have billionaire backers with a hidden agenda working against the interests of ordinary people across the UK and particularly in resource-rich Scotland. That's why Scotland needs an alternative source of information so that Scots are fully informed about what's really being done to their country by the entitled ruling class of another country. Support us to continue this vital work by sharing this and other Scotland Channel shows on your social media and talking to friends, family, and work colleagues about us. Because knowledge is power. And please consider making a donation to the channel by visiting our website, thescotlandchannel.tv/#donate. Thank you. That winds up our stories for this week. Join us again next Friday at 7 p.m. or any time thereafter.